It started like something simple. Chicken roasting in the oven, jazz humming softly in the background, and the kind of dim lighting Talia always said made people feel at home. I stood in front of the dining room mirror, adjusting the collar of the dark green button-down she'd bought me 2 birthdays ago, the one she said brought out the seriousness in my eyes. It's just dinner, I told myself, straightening my sleeves. But even then, something in my chest felt off. Like my body knew what my mind hadn't caught up to yet. Talia greeted me with a peck on the cheek, her smile too thin, too polite. "Glad you made it," she said, like I was a guest in my own marriage. The table was set for 6, her parents Frederick and Joelle at the ends, her sister Brielle beside her, and me at the other side like a piece that didn't quite fit the puzzle. There was red wine already breathing, cloth napkins folded too perfectly, and the kind of tension that makes the air feel like it's pressing down on your skin. We sat. We passed dishes. We made small talk, the kind that barely scratched the surface. I mentioned a recent trip to San Francisco, and Joelle blinked as if I'd said I'd just come back from Pluto. Brielle scrolled on her phone between bites. And Frederick? He kept eyeing me like I'd left fingerprints on something sacred. Then it happened, so fast and yet so deliberate, like they'd rehearsed it. Frederick put his fork down, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and stood. He was still chewing, but his eyes were already burning. "You know what?" he said, voice louder than it needed to be. "I'm tired of pretending. You don't belong here." The room froze. I set my fork down quietly. "Excuse me." "You heard me," he snapped, pointing across the table. "You're not one of us. You never were. You're just a lowlife. Uneducated trash who got lucky and tricked my daughter into marrying beneath her." A sharp chill cut through me, colder than any winter I'd ever known. But what made it worse, what made the words stick, was the silence that followed. Not a gasp. Not a protest. Nothing. Joelle didn't even blink. She nodded like she'd been waiting for the cue. "Honestly, Gerald, it's embarrassing. The way you speak. The way you dress. The fact that you still try to act like you fit in our world." Talia should have married better. I turned to my wife. Talia, the woman I built Sunday mornings with. The woman I shared dreams, fears, and a king-sized bed with. I looked at her, hoping, begging for something. Anything. But she stared at her plate like she couldn't see the fire in the room. She said nothing. Not even a whisper of defense. Her silence wasn't neutral. It was betrayal shaped like indifference. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't part of the family. I was part of a performance. One they'd grown tired of pretending to enjoy. I breathed slowly, gathering every ounce of restraint I had. I could have shouted. Could have flipped the table and told them about the contracts I'd closed last quarter, the companies I'd bought out, the staff I employed. I could have shoved numbers and success and Forbes articles down their throats until they choked on their own assumptions. But I didn't. Instead, I adjusted my collar, stood to my full height, and looked each of them in the eye. My heart pounded, not from rage, but from clarity. I wasn't just being kicked out of a dinner. I was being released from a cage I hadn't realized I was in. I turned to Talia one last time. "You're really not going to say anything?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her eyes dropped. Silence again. So I gave them the simplest word in the world. The one that said everything I didn't need to explain. "Okay." And just like that, I walked out. No final toast. No dramatic monologue. Just the sound of my shoes on their polished hardwood floor, my breath steady, my steps sure. I didn't take my coat. I didn't take my pride. Because they hadn't broken it. The night air outside greeted me like an old friend. Cool, honest, unpretentious. I got into my car and drove in silence, letting the quiet wrap around me like armor. What they didn't know, what none of them even bothered to ask, was that I had options. Power. Money. Influence. They thought I was a charity case with a clean haircut. They didn't know I earned $45 million last fiscal year. Not inherited. Not gifted. Built. Engineered. Every cent etched from years of sleepless nights and risks they wouldn't even know how to spell. But I didn't need to prove that to them. Because anyone who could look you in the eye and strip you of dignity without blinking didn't deserve the truth anyway. By the time I got home. My real home, the one I bought, furnished, and paid taxes on, I didn't feel broken. I felt free. They thought they served me humiliation on a silver platter. But what they really handed me was a blank slate. And I was about to draw something they'd never be invited to see. By morning, I was in Florida. Not just passing through. Not running or retreating. but exactly where I had planned to be before last night's performance masquerading as a dinner. The road had been long, but I made the drive in one stretch, no music, no podcasts, just the hum of the engine and the thoughts tumbling through my head like dominoes. When the gates to my beachfront home opened, that hum quieted. The world outside didn't matter here. This place was mine. 5 bedrooms, minimalist design, all white stone and glass, with clean lines and panoramic windows that let the Atlantic in like an old friend. I bought it outright, no mortgage, no cosigners. Just me, a wire transfer, and the kind of balance you don't talk about over dinner with people who assume your worth begins and ends with the name on your college diploma. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, sealing off the noise from everything that came before. Dropped my bag in the entryway, kicked off my shoes, and for the first time in a long time, I breathed, deeply, fully. The air smelled like salt and sunshine, like the kind of peace you earn, not find. I walked barefoot across polished wood floors and headed straight for the back deck, where the ocean waited like it always did, patient and endless. I poured a cup of coffee, black, strong, hot, and sat in the teak chair that faced the horizon. From here, the sky looked wider, like it was making space for something new. My phone buzzed, but I didn't reach for it. I didn't need to. I already knew who it was. Miles, my assistant, punctual to a fault. Instead, I sipped and listened to the waves. They didn't ask me to explain myself. They didn't demand degrees or pedigrees. They didn't insult me at dinner tables dressed in judgment. They whispered what my wife never did. You made it. On your own. And no one can take that from you. Eventually, I did pick up the phone, because the world I built doesn't slow down just because people showed me their true colors. Morning, Miles, I said, voice steady. Boss, welcome back. First off, the Dubai investor wants to meet Friday instead of next Tuesday. He's trying to expedite the deal. Good. Move him to the afternoon slot. I want time to breathe. Understood. You've also got the press preview for the fintech rollout on Thursday, morning coverage, and the exclusive with Tech Insider. I nodded, already shifting into the headspace that felt like home. Rafiq confirmed the Miami rental acquisition. Signed this morning. We now own 72 units across 3 buildings. Construction finishes in 10 weeks. I allowed myself a slow grin. Perfect. Miles paused. Also, your attorney followed up on the paperwork and the prenup. He said to let you know, you're untouchable. That part made me chuckle. Not out of pride. Out of clarity. Talia's family thought I came to them with open palms. What they never realized was that I had built an empire they'd never be able to understand, let alone touch. I didn't leave that dinner empty-handed. I walked out with everything that mattered: dignity, freedom, control. And the law? It had my back. I ended the call and leaned back, letting the sun warm my face. The deck overlooked a private slice of sand most people only saw in travel brochures. It stretched out like a promise I kept to myself. Every palm tree, every stone tile, every grain of wood in this place was mine. Designed, paid for, protected. I wasn't some lucky guy who stumbled into wealth. I was a builder. And I built quietly. I built while they were laughing, while they were dismissing me, while they were bragging about inheritance checks and old money that taught them nothing about earning. I finished my coffee and walked through the house, past the abstract art I actually understood, the books I read twice, the kitchen where I made every meal with my own hands. No staff. No chef. Just me and my peace. I wasn't healing. I had already healed. I was simply removing the last traces of noise from a life that was already too full to make room for people who never cared to understand it. Later that evening, after signing off on a few calls and reading the revised Dubai term sheet, I sat again on the deck. The sun was setting, casting golden light across the water and turning the sky into something worthy of a canvas. I didn't scroll social media. I didn't check Talia's Instagram. I didn't wonder if they missed me. Because you don't long for people who served you shame and called it tradition. What I did do was open the folder my attorney had sent, labeled Prenuptial Agreement, Execution Clause, and flip through the details. The language was ironclad. Every account remained mine. Every asset traced directly to my name. And most importantly, there were no claims to future earnings. That document was a quiet wall, protecting everything I'd built from everyone who thought they could someday knock. They could try to rewrite the story later. Say they were caught off guard, that they didn't mean it, that family dinners get emotional. But truth has a timestamp. And last night, they said everything they needed to say clearly, proudly, cruelly. Talia didn't stop them. That was her choice. Now she'd live with the silence that followed it. I ended the night with one last walk along the shoreline, barefoot in the sand, letting the waves nip at my toes. Each step forward felt like a chapter turning. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't broken. I was done. And in that clarity, I made a quiet promise. I would never again explain myself to people who were too arrogant to ask, too insecure to listen, and too blind to see. They didn't know I left with everything. But I did. It took exactly 3 weeks for the silence to break. For 21 days, there wasn't a single word from Talia. Not a text. Not a call. Not a let's talk. I assumed that was the direction we were both headed, separate, silent, final. And I was fine with that. I wasn't waiting by the phone. I wasn't refreshing inboxes. I was building. While they let silence grow like mold, I was laying down the next phase of the life they never bothered to ask about. The tech firm in Boston had finally come around on the offer. We'd been circling each other for months, but now that my fintech platform's growth chart had gone vertical, their tone shifted from skeptical to eager. I was leading the acquisition talks myself, hands-on, because I trusted no one else to speak the language of hunger the way I did. I spent my days on video calls with lawyers and CFOs, toggling between dashboards and forecasts that made one thing clear. We were just getting started. The Miami rental project was also moving. 72 units under redevelopment, most of them already leased on pre-sales. I'd created an ecosystem: rent, manage, reinvest. My team was young but sharp, and they understood my rules. No cutting corners, no flashy nonsense, and no one disrespects where we came from. It was during one of those long days, mid-negotiation with our legal counsel, that my phone vibrated off the edge of my desk. 16 missed calls, all from unknown number. At first, I assumed it was spam. Real estate brokers trying to sell me another coastal property. Lenders I didn't need. Journalists fishing for a comment now that my name had started to circulate among mid-cap circles. I ignored it. Then came the voicemail. I pressed play, casually sipping from a bottle of spring water, ready to delete the moment I heard nonsense. But the voice that came through the speaker froze me in place. Gerald, it's Joelle. The pause she left after her name felt loaded, rehearsed. Like she'd said it 10 different ways in her head before finally recording this version. Listen, we really need to talk. I know things escalated, but there's a lot you don't understand. It's urgent. Please just call us back. It's important. She sounded like someone who had been practicing sincerity but hadn't quite mastered it. I deleted the message without finishing it. Not out of anger, out of clarity. Joelle, the woman who called me trash with wine in her hand and smirks at the ready, now wanted my attention. The same Joelle who couldn't look me in the eye unless it was to cut me down. I leaned back in my chair and laughed. Not bitterly, not loudly. Just a short, real laugh. Because the cycle was so predictable. The moment people realize you're not drowning like they hoped, they pretend they were the ones throwing the life raft. I didn't respond. Because I was busy. Busy finalizing contracts worth more than their combined net worth. Busy overseeing branding updates for the Miami complex. Busy hiring staff for the support center we were opening in Atlanta to give underrepresented youth a foot in the door into finance. Busy doing the work they never saw but now suddenly respected. But they weren't done. The calls kept coming. Unknown. Blocked. Voicemails growing more emotional by the day. Talia's been going through a lot, Joelle said in one. She hasn't been herself. Please, if you just let us explain. Where was that urge to explain when Frederick called me a lowlife over dinner? When Talia sat in silence and let the heat sear me while she poured another glass of Pinot? When they made their judgment a family activity? Now it was urgent? Now it mattered? I sat at my desk, surrounded by glass walls and ocean light, and thought about how different this office was from the basement where I started. Back when I coded alone, grinding through investor rejections, surviving on instant noodles and hope. None of them were there. Not Talia. Not Joelle. Not Frederick. The only thing they'd ever contributed to my journey was a dinner invitation dressed as an ambush. So no, I didn't respond. Instead, I responded to the needs that mattered. My company, my team, my vision. That same day, I approved 2 new hires and pushed forward the Series B planning. I gave Rafiq the green light to expand our infrastructure. We were scaling now, not surviving. Every day I ignored their calls was another day I invested in people who respected me. Later that evening, Miles messaged me. Heard from Tech Tribe. They want to feature you in this self-made issue. You in? I replied with a simple, yes. Let's show them what silence looks like when it builds instead of begs. Still, part of me understood what was happening. The panic, the sudden sweetness, the attempts to reach out. It wasn't about guilt. It wasn't about missing me. It was about realization that they'd miscalculated. That the man they dismissed without hesitation was the same man now being pursued by magazines, venture capitalists, and global investors. And they wanted back in. But here's the thing. People don't get to mock your roots and then ask for shade when the tree finally grows. The next morning, while sipping coffee by the water, my phone buzzed again. This time, a text from a new number. Please, for Talia's sake, just let us talk. Just one meeting. No yelling. We promise. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Not because I was tempted to reply, but because the audacity still managed to surprise me. I tapped the screen, blocked, closed the curtains, and returned to my coffee. Because while they were counting on me being bitter, what they never expected was that I'd moved on. Completely. I had just finished my second espresso when the intercom buzzed. Mr. Stone, the concierge said, his voice a shade more hesitant than usual. There's an older couple downstairs. They say they're your in-laws. I didn't answer right away. I let the words hang in the space between us like steam from my cup. The ocean wind drifted in through the open balcony doors, soft and constant. I hadn't expected them to show up. Not like this. Not unannounced. But part of me wasn't surprised either. This was the next phase of their performance, a surprise act, improvised poorly. Tell them I'm unavailable, I said, calmly. And remind them this building doesn't allow unregistered guests past the lobby. The concierge paused. Understood, sir. I placed the mug on the railing and turned to the screen mounted discreetly beside the wine rack. The security feed flicked on. There they were. Frederick and Joelle, standing by the concierge desk, looking out of place in a space built for people who respected boundaries. Frederick looked agitated, hands balled into fists at his sides, pacing like he was preparing for a courtroom cross-examination. Joelle clutched her purse in one hand, the other dabbing at her cheek with a tissue. It might have been real emotion, or just good theater. Either way, I wasn't buying a ticket. Frederick leaned in, said something sharp to the concierge, then turned and stared up toward the elevator like he could glare through 15 floors and make me come down. I didn't move. I watched. You see, they didn't recognize this world because they never believed I could build one. They saw ambition in others, but never in me. I wasn't Ivy League. I wasn't polished by their definition. I didn't wear the right last name or memorize the right wines. To them, I was a stray dog their daughter foolishly tried to housebreak. Disposable. Replaceable. But what stood between us now, glass walls, black granite floors, beachfront elevation, and 24-hour security, wasn't just concrete and marble. It was proof. Proof that I didn't need them. That I never did. They had come, of course, not because of love, not even remorse. No. They had come because they saw the headlines, heard the whispers, maybe caught wind of my name being mentioned in tech circles where real influence lived. They had come because silence didn't mean failure. It meant progress they weren't invited to witness. My phone buzzed again. Concierge, one more time. Sir, the woman says she's very sorry. She's asking if you'll just come down for 5 minutes. I almost laughed. Joelle hadn't blinked when she called me a stain on the family image. Now she wanted 5 minutes? That's the problem with people like her. They think apologies are a currency they can spend after overdrawing on cruelty. Let them know this is a residential tower, not a revolving door, I replied. They can leave the same way they came in. He hesitated. You want me to escort them out? No, I said. Just let them sit in it. Give them time to understand what it means when the answer is no. I clicked the screen off and walked into the living room. My phone pinged again, this time from Miles. Investor signed. Dubai's in. Deal closed. Congrats. I smiled. That was the world I lived in now. Quiet wins. Digital contracts. And momentum no one could stop. I returned to my office, clean lines, sand-colored wood, soft leather seating, and a single framed photo on the shelf. Me and my late grandfather, the only man who ever told me I didn't need to dress like a king to become one. He worked as a mechanic for 40 years, never owned a suit, but taught me more about dignity than any of Talia's relatives ever could. His lessons lived in this space, in every contract I signed, in every boundary I enforced. 30 minutes passed, then an hour. I turned the security feedback on. Frederick was now seated stiffly on the lobby bench, one leg bouncing in impatience. Joelle was crying, or pretending to. Either way, it wasn't my job to decipher it. I owed them nothing. Not my time. Not my presence. Not the comfort of a second chance. And maybe that's what bothered them most. This wasn't the version of me they thought would emerge after rejection. They expected a man broken enough to beg his way back in, to make himself smaller for their approval, to wear shame like a uniform. But that man never existed. Not really. I was simply quiet while I worked. Meek while I learned. I let them talk because I knew one day I wouldn't have to explain. I'd just live, and that life would be loud enough. Eventually, the concierge called once more. "They're leaving now, sir." I didn't ask if they said anything. I didn't watch them go. I just nodded, turned off the feed, and resumed my work. Because when you're building something that lasts, you don't stop for the people who never showed up when it mattered. They had their chance. Now, they'd have to sit with the fact that I built a world they didn't believe in, and they would never be part of it. Talia called just after sunset. I was standing barefoot on the deck, a glass of cold water in hand, watching the last streaks of gold burn out over the horizon. The ocean was calm, like it always was in the evening, pulling in light and giving nothing back. I didn't expect her name to light up my phone again. Not after 3 weeks of silence followed by her parents' lobby ambush. But there it was, blinking like it still had rights. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. "Hello." For a moment, all I could hear was breathing. Hesitant, shallow. Then her voice, softer than I remembered, like she thought gentleness might serve as an apology. "I didn't know they were going to say that to you." I didn't speak. Not yet. I wanted her to hear the quiet she left behind. The kind of silence you create when you allow someone you supposedly love to be devoured in front of you. They got carried away," she continued, like it was a mild outburst. Like I'd merely been passed over for dessert, not dignity. "Carried away?" I finally said, each word like a flat stone skipped across still water. "Talia, they didn't lose their temper. They unloaded years of how they really felt." She exhaled. "I know. You do?" "Yes." Another beat of silence. "Then let me ask you something," I said, stepping back inside, walking slowly to the window where my reflection stared back at me, unbothered, unfazed. "Did you defend me?" It was the simplest question in the world. Just 3 words. But it split everything open. The line went quiet. Then came her whisper. No, that was it. No excuse. No stammered rationale. Just the naked truth, the kind of truth that hits harder than any insult because it confirms what your instincts had been screaming all along. "No," she said again. I froze. I didn't know what to say. "You didn't have to know what to say, Talia. You just had to choose me." "I know." I leaned against the wall, letting the cool air brush against my skin. I closed my eyes for a second, remembering her hand in mine at our wedding. How tightly she held it. How her voice shook when she said, "I do." I thought we were a team. I thought even when the world turned sharp, we'd shield each other. But she let me stand there alone. You can't unsee that. You can't unfeel it. "You know the thing about betrayal?" I said finally. "It's not always a knife. Sometimes it's just the person who's supposed to catch you stepping aside." She sniffled. I've been replaying it over and over in my head. I was so ashamed. I didn't know how to call you after. And when my parents came to see you, I thought maybe. No, my voice hardened. Don't let yourself off the hook by acting like their visit was for me. That was about them trying to erase the cost of their arrogance. Not to mend anything. And not once did I hear from you until now. I didn't know how, she whispered. You picked silence, I said. And silence during betrayal is just as loud as the betrayal itself. I never wanted it to go like this. But it did. I walked to the bar cart, poured myself a splash of whiskey neat. Not because I needed it, but because I wanted to mark this moment, the death of an illusion. The moment I stopped pretending the woman I married was still beside me. Talia, I said, more gently now, you don't lose a good man. You erase him, and then you wonder why your world suddenly goes quiet. She didn't respond. Because what do you say to that? What do you say when you realize you let a fire die and only now miss the warmth? I wasn't asking for a war, I continued. I was asking for one word, one sentence, a look, something that said, he's mine and you won't disrespect him in front of me. But instead, I got silence. And that silence said everything. She sniffled again, but I didn't move. I didn't comfort. That wasn't my job anymore. I still love you, she said. I didn't answer, because I knew love wasn't the issue. Loyalty was. You can love someone and still abandon them. You can love someone and still be the reason they never look at you the same again. I hope you find peace, I said finally. Her breath caught. Is this goodbye? I don't think it needs a name, I said. It's just clarity. And I hung up. I stood there for a long moment, the glass warm in my hand, the sea stretching out beyond the windows like something infinite. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt weightless. Like I had finally stopped dragging around the version of her I kept trying to make fit the reality in front of me. That night, I didn't check my phone again. I didn't write about it in a journal or listen to sad music or look through old photos. I closed the windows, turned off the lights, and slept. Alone, but not lonely, because I'd finally told the truth out loud. And the truth was simple. She let it happen. And I would never let that happen to me again. The celebration wasn't loud. That's never been my style. No flashy champagne towers, no influencers snapping photos to prove they were in the room. Just my team, tight-knit, driven, and loyal. We gathered at my Miami penthouse, the second one I bought this year, this one with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the marina and a rooftop garden I designed myself. Soft jazz played in the background. The lights were low, the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and citrus, and laughter echoed from the terrace where we toasted to the kind of win that doesn't come with confetti, but with weight. 12 million, Rafiq said, holding up his glass. Seed round closed. Valuation tripled. And the board didn't blink. They know what we're building. He turned toward me with that half-smile he always gave when he was proud. To the man they underestimated. Everyone raised their glasses. To Gerald. The clink of crystal followed. I nodded, said thank you. But inside, I was somewhere else. I wasn't thinking about term sheets or market shares. I wasn't basking in the numbers. I was thinking about how not long ago, I was being told straight to my face that I didn't belong, that I was unworthy of the very success now being toasted by people who knew what it cost to build from nothing. I didn't bring up Talia or her parents. Not here. Not now. Not because I'd forgotten. Because they no longer earn the space. Their words, their judgments, their absence, they weren't fuel anymore. Just history. A chapter closed, sealed, and boxed away on a shelf I'd never revisit. Later that night, after everyone had left, I sat by the pool on the rooftop. The city stretched out in twinkles beneath me, the water still, a mirror to my new life. I opened my phone and scrolled through the unread voicemails. Another one from Joelle. This one had a subject line in the transcription, an apology and a request. I tapped play. Gerald, this is Joelle. Again, I know you're probably tired of hearing from me, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. Truly. For the things I said. For the way I treated you. I was wrong. A pause. We've had time to think, and we miss you. Talia misses you. Frederick does too, though he won't say it out loud. We never meant to hurt you. We didn't understand you. Not the way we should have. Then the shift. We were hoping you might be able to help. Frederick's investment property hasn't performed like we thought. We're facing some tax challenges. It's complicated, but we're struggling. And we thought, if there was any chance you'd be willing to talk, we'd be grateful. There it was. The real reason. Not regret. Not reconciliation. But access. I stood and walked inside, the message still echoing in my head. I knew what I needed to do. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I owed it to the man I was 3 months ago. The one who walked away from that dinner table stripped bare, humiliated, and discarded. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and composed a short message. Joelle, I'm sorry for your situation, but I won't fund comfort for those who mock my foundation. I wish you peace, from a distance. Send. No signature. No flourish. Just the boundary they never believed I was strong enough to draw. After that, I called Miles. Gerald, he answered, half expecting a late update. I need you to run a scan on Frederick and Joelle's real estate holdings. See what properties are exposed. If they go under, I want to be ready to bid through one of our shells. You want the assets? No, I said. I want the power of the option. That's all. Got it. I ended the call, walked into the master suite, and stared out at the moonlit coast. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clear. There's a difference. See, when you grow up with nothing, people assume you'll always be grateful just to be invited in. They don't expect you to say no, to build something better, to walk away not in anger, but in peace. Apologies, real or not, don't equal access. They don't wipe the slate. They don't dissolve the sting of words meant to break you. Forgiveness is personal, but access? That's earned. And they lost the key. That night, I slept well, not because I'd won anything, but because I finally stopped trying to prove I deserved a seat at tables that were never set for me in the first place. The article dropped on a Tuesday morning, right as the sun broke over the Atlantic and spilled light across the glass walls of my Miami office. I was barefoot, standing on the marble tiles with a mug in my hand that read self-made, a gift from Rafiq after our last round closed. The email subject line was simple, "It's live." And underneath, the link to the feature I'd done quietly with Monarch Weekly. I clicked. The Quiet Architect, How Gerald Stone Built a $45 million Empire After Being Disowned. My name. My story. My picture, me on the deck of my Florida home, when tugging gently at my white shirt, bare feet against the warm wood, eyes calm and focused. No watch. No chain. No posing. Just presence. The way I always wanted to be seen, not loud, not flashy, but undeniable. The article was everything I asked for. No dramatics. No sob story. Just facts. They detailed the launch of my fintech platform, the acquisitions, the Miami Housing Initiative. They even included a quote from my first investor. He was the kind of guy who didn't blink when told no. He just kept building. Now we follow his lead. I scrolled slowly, taking in the paragraphs like chapters I'd never had the time to write. There was a part about my upbringing. How I was raised by a single mother who worked nights at a hospital and still made time to teach me how to read stock tickers. How I once coded the foundation of our current platform in the back of a mechanic shop I rented for $200 a month. How I wore the same pair of black dress shoes to every meeting for 3 years straight because I believed respect should come from ideas, not labels. Then came the quote that would live far longer than the article itself. "You don't have to clap for me now," I told the journalist, because the silence taught me how to clap for myself. That was it. The heart of everything. The anthem for every boy who'd ever been told to wait his turn by people who never intended to give him one. I finished reading, set the mug down, and stepped out onto the balcony. The wind hit my face gently, like a quiet nod from the universe. My phone buzzed. I ignored it. Buzzed again. Then came the screenshot from Maya. My younger sister, the only blood relative I trusted completely. She didn't say a word. Just sent the image. A group chat. Talia's family. "Joel, he's embarrassing us." "Frederick, why does he always need an audience?" "Brielle, we were just trying to help. He's being dramatic." I stared at it, letting the hypocrisy roll over me like cold water. Embarrassing them? After everything they said. After the dinner where they ripped through my dignity like it was wrapping paper. Now they were the victims? Now they were hurt by the story being told. I let out a low, humorless laugh. Because they still didn't get it. This wasn't a performance. I didn't do the article to shame them. I did it to honor the version of myself that survived their dismissal. I didn't write it to gloat. I wrote it because my silence had been misinterpreted for too long. They thought I'd disappeared, but I was just busy building a life they'd never be invited into. Maya followed up with another message. "Maya, just wanted you to see it. But don't let it get to you. You look like a boss in that photo." I smiled and texted her back. "Me. It doesn't get to me. It just reminds me why I stopped explaining. Because what they couldn't stand wasn't the success. It was that I no longer needed their validation to claim it." Later that afternoon, Miles called. "The article's gone viral in our circles. I'm getting outreach from international investors. That Australian fund? They're ready to meet." "Good," I said, flipping through a portfolio of design drafts for the upcoming Miami units. "Keep the momentum going." "Oh, and your old professor from State reached out too. Said he's proud." I paused, surprised. "Professor Garrison?" "Yup, the one who told you to consider a more realistic career path. He says he always saw your potential." I laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from somewhere deep and exhausted. Of course he did. That evening, as the article continued to ripple across networks and circles and social feeds, I sat back and thought about the younger version of me. The one who used to knock on the doors of possibility, hoping someone inside would care enough to open them. No one did. So I built my own house. And now, The people who once slammed the door in my face were upset they didn't have a key. There was a knock at my door. Not metaphorical. Actual. It was Rafik. Had to stop by, he said, stepping inside. Brought wine. We stood on the balcony, the city lights below like a blanket of stars fallen to earth. They saw it, he asked. They saw it. And they called it embarrassing. He snorted. They're mad they weren't the ones being interviewed. That's all. I nodded. They wanted the ending to the story to be their redemption arc. But you're the one who changed. Exactly. Rafik poured the wine. So what now? I swirled the glass once, slow and thoughtful. Now? We finish what we started. We expand. We fund others who look like us. We make it so the next Gerald doesn't have to sit through a dinner like that to be taken seriously. And them. They can keep pretending they didn't read it. Because here's the truth, they read every word. Twice. And then again. Because nothing stings more than watching the man you thought was disposable rise without reaching back. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to yell. I just needed to live. Louder. Cleaner. Unapologetically. The next morning, my inbox was full, VC interest, speaking invitations, requests for mentorship from young founders who said my story felt like theirs. But one email stood out. From info@whitestonepropertygroup.com subject. Opportunity for collaboration Frederick's company. I opened it. Gerald, after reading your article, we'd be interested in discussing a potential collaboration opportunity regarding our upcoming multifamily units. Your recent work in Miami aligns well with our next project. Please let us know if you'd be open to a meeting. Warm regards, Whitestone Development Group. No mention of the dinner. No mention of his words. Just business. I stared at the screen, then drafted my reply. Frederick, I appreciate your interest. However, I reserve partnerships for those who respected me before the headlines. Best, Gerald sent. I closed my laptop, walked to the balcony, and looked out over the ocean. They saw the article. They pretended not to. But that's the thing about truth. Once it's out, it doesn't need permission to echo. And I wasn't done speaking. The call came from my lawyer on a Thursday morning, just as I was stepping out of a strategy session with my advisory board. We'd finalized expansion into 3 new markets, and the team was buzzing with that particular kind of momentum that only happens when risk turns into reality. Everyone shook hands, slapped backs, and talked next steps. I was walking past the curved glass wall of the conference room, sun streaking across the polished floor, when my phone buzzed with his name, Andrew Kellman, ESQ. Gerald, he said, his tone businesslike, but with an edge of surprise. You're not going to believe this. I've learned not to be surprised, I replied, stepping into my private office and closing the door behind me. Well, he exhaled. Apparently Frederick's financial advisor reached out. They're hoping you might be open to extending a family loan to assist with an ongoing property tax issue on one of his older commercial buildings. Midtown. Over-leveraged. I guess the new tenants didn't pan out. I stared out at the ocean from the office window. Calm waves. Clear sky. No turbulence here. Only in their world. And what exactly are they asking? I said, a bridge loan. Short-term. Low interest, if possible. They used the phrase, and I quote, as a gesture of family solidarity. That made me laugh. Family solidarity? That's rich. Andrew chuckled. I thought you might say that. Here's my response. I said, walking slowly back toward my desk. Send them my corporate lending rates. No adjustments. No favors. No shortcuts. Business only? Exactly. There was a pause on the line, like he was weighing whether to ask the next question. You sure about that? You don't want to use this as leverage. I shook my head. No leverage. Just distance. This isn't a chess match. It's a lesson. And I'm not in the business of giving discounts to people who disrespected the architect of the foundation they now want to stand on. He let out a slow breath. Understood. I'll forward the terms. I ended the call and sat for a moment, fingers interlocked, elbows resting on the edge of my desk. I wasn't angry, not even mildly irritated. I was just steady. Like someone who finally understood that forgiveness is not the same thing as access. I could wish them peace from afar. I could even let go of the wound. But I didn't owe them proximity. I didn't owe them the privilege of re-entering a world they tried to laugh me out of. They taught me boundaries. Now they'd get to live with them. I sent a quick message to Miles. Frederick's team reached out. Want a loan? I gave Andrew the green light to respond with our official lending terms. No variation. Miles, copy that. The audacity never ends. Me, it ends where the contract starts. I leaned back and exhaled. The kind of exhale that comes when the wind is finally at your back, not in your face. Everything I'd built, every sleepless night, every rejection, every skipped vacation, every moment I chose growth over comfort, it had brought me here. And they wanted to walk through a door they once tried to bar me from. I was done handing out keys. That evening, I made myself dinner. Grilled salmon, sautéed asparagus, quinoa, and a glass of Cabernet from a vineyard I invested in last fall. No chef, no staff, just me and the kind of peace you don't find, you earn. I ate outside on the terrace, the breeze brushing past me like a whisper of gratitude. When the meal was done, I sat back and looked out over the darkening water. I thought about the boy I used to be, the one who wore thrifted suits to networking events, the one who took the bus across town for coding boot camps because he couldn't afford Uber, the one who kept showing up even when no one clapped. And then I thought about Frederick, Joel, Talia, all of them sitting in their manufactured little empire, built on lineage and entitlement, watching mine rise out of the very dirt they once kicked in my direction. I didn't hate them, but I no longer saw them as anything more than a part of my origin story. Just then, my phone buzzed again. Voicemail. Joel. I didn't press play. I already knew the cadence, regret wrapped in flattery, apology dipped in hope. It was always the same tune. We didn't mean it. We didn't know. Can you help us now? But that's not how it works. You don't curse the seed and expect shade from the tree. They wanted my resources, not my redemption. They wanted a pass, not a path. They wanted access to the benefits of who I'd become, without reconciling with the pain they caused to get there. I stood, emptied my wine into the sink, and walked upstairs. On my nightstand was a framed quote Maya gave me the day after I walked out of that infamous dinner. You're not hard to love. They're just not soft enough to try. I stared at it for a long time before turning out the light. The next morning, Andrew followed up. They've declined your loan terms, he said. Apparently, they think it's predatory. I smiled. Nothing predatory about transparency. That's the rate we offer to any outside entity. Exactly, he said. Just thought you'd want to know. I didn't reply, not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew everything had already been said, without me ever raising my voice. Forgiveness is not a revolving door. It's a one-way street you decide whether or not to walk down. I chose to walk forward. They stayed behind. And that decision, it's the most peace I've ever known. The envelope was cream-colored, thick, and sealed with the kind of care people reserve for wedding invitations or final farewells. It wasn't marked with a return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly looped, controlled cursive that had once written my name on anniversary cards and place settings. Joelle. She had taken the time to sit down, pick a pen, and write something by hand, as if ink could do what voicemail and shame hadn't. It was waiting in a stack of forwarded mail on the corner of my desk, just behind a few real estate tax forms and a catalog from a furniture studio in Brooklyn. Corinne, my assistant, had placed it neatly in a personal folder. I hadn't touched it in 3 days. I'd seen it, acknowledged it, and moved on until now. Something about the silence in my home that night made it louder than usual. No meetings, no deadlines, no investor calls. Just the quiet hum of success breathing through a space too clean for drama. I took the envelope and carried it with me to the back deck. The moon was out, casting silver on the waves below. I sat down on the teak bench, sliced the seal open with the edge of my index finger, and unfolded the note inside. 3 pages. Handwritten. Neatly dated in the top right corner. Gerald, we just wanted better for Talia. I know how that sounds, but it's the truth. We misunderstood your path. We didn't realize what you were building or how hard you were working. I won't excuse what we said to you that night. I won't insult your intelligence with justifications. But I will say this, we were wrong. I stopped reading. Because that line right there, it wasn't for me. It was for them. They were wrong, but not just because they judged me prematurely. They were wrong because they thought I would stay in the box they tried to shove me into. They thought I would seek their approval forever, that I would shape myself to fit their vision of worthy. But I never wanted their vision. I had my own. I continued reading, slower now. We've watched from a distance. The articles, the interviews, the Miami projects, the speaking engagements. I saw the photo of you on the deck. I saw the smile that didn't need anyone else to validate it. And it humbled me. There was something honest in that part. I'll give her that. Joelle never lacked intelligence. She knew how to craft words that sounded genuine, even if the motivation behind them was muddied. But then came the turn. We'd love to see the beach house. Not because of what it represents, but because we'd like to see you again. In your space. In your world. Maybe, somehow, start again. We miss Talia's smile. We miss having you in our lives. And there it was. Not me. Not truly. The house. The view. The proximity to something they no longer controlled. It wasn't affection. It was curiosity. Not apology. Just strategic nostalgia. They didn't want me. They wanted proof they still had a path back into the orbit of my success. That they could slide back in through the side door, soften the past with pleasantries, and be seen beside me long enough to look gracious by association. I folded the letter once, neatly. Then I stood. I walked back inside, placed the letter on my office shredder, and fed the first page through. I watched the blades tear through the cursive without hesitation. Second page. Gone. Third page. Gone. There was something freeing about it. No drama. No resentment. Just closure in motion. Then I picked up my phone. "Corinne," I said when she answered. "Yes, Mr. Stone? Let's schedule the Forbes follow-up shoot." "Of course. Same location as last time?" "Here," I said. "But I want a minimalist coastal vibe this time. Morning light. Clean lines. Nothing performative. Just presence." "I'll get them here by next Tuesday." "Perfect." I ended the call and stood in the silence for a moment. In the quiet hum of an empire that didn't need anyone's applause to stand tall. They wanted to see the house. But if they wanted to see me, they could see me from the magazine rack at Whole Foods. The next morning, the media team arrived just after sunrise. The photographer, a woman named Emery I'd worked with before, adjusted her lenses as the sun climbed the horizon. I stood barefoot on the stone steps outside the back doors, dressed in a soft gray sweater and navy slacks. No tie. No props. Just me, as I was. "This shot," she said. "It says everything. The light, the stillness, the strength." "Good," I said. "Let it speak louder than I ever did." The article came out a week later. This one wasn't about numbers or deals. It was about what came after the silence. About what it looked like to be unbothered, not bitter. Healed, not hardened. There was a quote they pulled from my off-camera conversation with Emery that I hadn't even realized they were recording. "Success isn't revenge. It's refusing to live small just because someone else handed you a shallow opinion." That one stuck. The phone didn't stop buzzing for days. Requests. DMs. Emails. Students from my old neighborhood. Messages from people I'd never met but who saw themselves in the arc of my story. But the only people who didn't reach out again? Talia. Joelle. Frederick. They went quiet. Not because they finally understood the damage, but because they realized the gate they'd once guarded no longer led to me. I built something else. Farther. Higher. And out of reach. The final letter came 6 months to the day after I walked out of that dinner. This time, it wasn't scented. No gold foil on the edges. No attempts at charm. Just plain white paper in a nondescript envelope, folded with the kind of weight that let me know it wasn't sent on impulse. It had been written slowly. Measured. The kind of letter you write when you've finally accepted what's already gone. It arrived on a Friday morning, dropped off by a private courier. No return address again, but this time I didn't need to check the handwriting. It wasn't Joelle's. It was Talia's. I didn't open it right away. I placed it on the marble kitchen island beside a bowl of ripe oranges, poured myself a cup of coffee, and stepped onto the deck as the tide rolled in just past the dunes. The breeze was different that morning. Softer. More forgiving. It carried no echoes from that night, no ghost of the word, lowlife, no sting of being told I was unworthy. Just wind. And peace. When I came back inside, I picked up the letter and sat down in the armchair facing the sea. I unfolded the page carefully, like it might crumble in my hands if I moved too quickly. I braced myself, not for hope, but for honesty. "Gerald, this is the last letter I'll send. I don't expect a reply. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know we were wrong. All of us. Me most of all. I watched you become something extraordinary, and I didn't lift a finger when they tried to reduce you. I stood by and let the people I loved tear into the man who loved me. I convinced myself that silence wasn't betrayal, but it was. And I'm sorry. I know you're gone now, in every way that matters. But if there's any space in your life, any corner of it where we can still exist, I'd be grateful. Talia." I folded it back slowly. No theatrics. No grand apology dripping with sentiment. Just clarity. But clarity comes late, sometimes too late to fix what silence destroyed. I set the letter down and stared out the window. I didn't cry. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt done. The kind of done that doesn't need noise. I had already moved on. That chapter had been closed long before this ink dried. The truth was, I had loved her once. Fiercely. But the version of her that let me stand alone while her family dismantled me in front of their dinnerware. That version died the moment she said nothing. There's no reset button for that kind of abandonment. I walked to my desk, opened a drawer, pulled out stationery I hadn't touched in over a year, and wrote the first letter I'd handwrite in a long, long time. Talia, thank you for your letter. And your honesty. It's more than I ever got when I needed it most. But I want you to know something. You taught me what it felt like to be unwanted. Truly, deeply, undeniably unwanted. That pain, the kind that makes you question your voice, your value, your very presence, it could have destroyed me. But I didn't let it. I used that silence. I let it carve tunnels in me until all that remained was clarity. I turned that pain into a fortress. And now, I live in it. Not as a prisoner, but as its architect. You are forgiven, but you will not be invited in. Because I no longer answer to the people who only clapped when I stayed small. Gerald, I sealed the envelope. No return address. No signature. No dramatic flourish. Just a line of truth that she would either respect or resent. I didn't care which. That wasn't my burden anymore. I handed the letter to Corinne with a quiet instruction. Deliver it directly. No delay. No follow-up. She nodded. No questions. That's why she was invaluable. She knew how to protect my peace. That night, I walked the shoreline alone, the tide kissing my feet with every step. The moon hung low like it was watching. I thought of all the versions of me that had once lived in other people's shadows. The boy who'd once wanted to be invited. The man who had once waited for acknowledgement. The husband who had once looked across a dinner table, desperate for someone to speak up. They were all gone. In their place was a builder, a strategist, a man who no longer needed to explain his worth to anyone who had a chance to see it and chose not to. 6 months had passed, and in that time, I had created something lasting. I wasn't just investing in real estate. I was investing in people. Underrepresented entrepreneurs who reminded me of myself, scrappy, brilliant, hungry. I launched a new initiative called Stonerise, a funding and mentorship program that would take overlooked founders and give them everything the world tried to deny them. Not just capital, but guidance, infrastructure, community. We signed our 10th mentee the same day I sent that final letter. His name was Eli, 22 years old. Built an AI logistics model out of his dorm room with nothing but a used laptop and public Wi-Fi. I met him in my office. He wore a faded gray hoodie and sat straight, nervous but focused. Why do you want to do this? I asked him. Because I'm tired of knocking on doors that were never built for me to open. I nodded. Then let's build our own. He blinked. Really? You think I fund people who wait to be picked? I leaned forward. I fund people who pick themselves. That's what legacy looked like. Not reconciliation with people who only loved the version of me they could control, but elevation of people who were born to break ceilings. I built my life from the floor of rooms I was never supposed to enter. Now, I was building doors for others. Talia's family hadn't said another word since receiving my letter, and that was fine. Sometimes the greatest peace is knowing you said everything you needed to say and never had to repeat it. The headlines stopped chasing me. The calls slowed. But my world? It expanded. I spent mornings drinking coffee on my balcony, evenings on Zoom calls with new founders, and weekends walking the beach with no one to answer to but the tide. One afternoon, as I stood barefoot in the sand, I whispered to the wind something I never had the courage to say aloud back then. They threw away trash. But I turned it into treasure. Not for them. Not to prove them wrong. But because I finally learned. I was never trash. They just didn't know what value looked like when it didn't come dressed in their reflection. The day had started like any other, with me buried in a mountain of paperwork, a fresh cup of coffee cooling beside me as I sifted through contracts. My office was quiet, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning and the occasional sound of my pen scratching against paper. It was just another routine day in the life of a man trying to keep everything together. Then my phone rang. Glancing at the screen, a small smile tugged at my lips when I saw Ava's name. My little girl. My entire world. It was unusual for her to call during school hours, but maybe she had forgotten something at home or wanted to tell me about her day. I swiped to answer, expecting to hear her cheerful voice. Instead, what I heard turned my blood to ice. "Dad, help me. They left me. They took Mom's new son, and I'm all alone." My body went rigid. My chair scraped against the floor as I shot up, knocking my coffee over without even noticing. My pulse pounded so violently in my ears that for a moment, I thought I had misheard her. But the trembling in her voice, the sheer terror behind those words, told me otherwise. "Ava, where are you?" My voice came out sharper than I intended, laced with fear. "At the park. The big one near Mom's house." "Daddy, please come," she sniffled, trying to be brave, but I could hear the quiet hiccups of a child holding back sobs. I was already grabbing my keys, my mind spinning. How could this have happened? Had they really just left her? My hands shook as I ended the call and immediately dialed Laura, my ex-wife, the woman I had once trusted with my daughter's safety. She picked up after a few rings, her voice filled with amusement. "What now?" she asked, as if this was nothing more than an inconvenience. I didn't even waste time with pleasantries. "You left Ava alone at a park? What the hell is wrong with you?" My voice was dangerously low, barely contained. There was silence for a second, then a chuckle, a laugh. "Oh, that? Yeah, we forgot her. LOL. She said it so casually, so dismissively, as if she had misplaced a set of keys, not a living, breathing child. And in the background, I heard him, Greg, the man she had replaced me with, the man now playing father to my daughter. He was laughing, too. My grip on the phone tightened so hard my knuckles went white. "You forgot her?" I repeated, my voice shaking with barely restrained fury. "Relax, she's fine. What's the big deal? We were in a rush, and we had the baby. She's 7, Laura. 7. You left her completely alone and—" I couldn't even finish the sentence. My heart was slamming against my ribcage, the rage burning through my veins like wildfire. "Oh, calm down," she said with a dismissive scoff. "It was just a joke. She'll be fine." A joke. They thought it was funny. Leaving a child abandoned in a public park wasn't a mistake, wasn't an accident. It was deliberate, cruel, unforgivable. They had no idea what they had just done. They had no idea that this moment, this call, was going to change everything. They had no idea that they were about to regret this for the rest of their lives. I drove faster than I ever had in my life. My hands were clenched around the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles were bloodless. My heart was hammering against my ribcage, and my foot was pressed to the gas pedal as if my own life depended on getting there in time. The city blurred past in streaks of concrete and metal, but my mind was only focused on one thing: Ava, my little girl, my 7-year-old daughter, sitting alone in a public park because the people who were supposed to care for her had tossed her aside like she was nothing. I gritted my teeth so hard my jaw ached. When I finally reached the park, I barely remembered throwing the car into park before I was out the door, my eyes scanning the area frantically. The moment I spotted her, my chest tightened painfully. Ava was curled up on a wooden bench near the playground, hugging her knees to her chest. Her small shoulders were shaking, and even from a distance, I could see the way her face was blotchy from crying. A kind-looking older couple sat nearby, glancing around as if they were looking for someone. Probably the parents of the abandoned child they had found. Ava lifted her head, and the second her big, teary eyes landed on me, she bolted off the bench and ran straight into my arms. "Daddy!" she sobbed, her little fingers clutching my shirt as if I might disappear if she let go. I didn't know what to do. They just left. I knelt down, gathering her into my arms, pressing my hand against the back of her head. She smelled like strawberries, her usual shampoo, but it was mixed with the scent of dried tears and panic. "I'm here, baby," I whispered, swallowing hard against the lump in my throat. "Daddy's here. I've got you." I held her for what felt like forever, waiting for her sobs to subside. My entire body was shaking with anger, but I forced myself to stay calm for her. I couldn't fall apart now. The couple approached hesitantly. The woman, who had graying hair and a soft expression, gave me a small, relieved smile. We found her sitting here alone, she explained gently. She was crying. We were just about to call the police when she said you were on your way. I forced my voice to remain steady. Thank you. Thank you for staying with her. Of course, the man said firmly. I have grandkids. I can't imagine. His voice trailed off, anger flickering in his gaze. He didn't have to say it. I knew what he was thinking. What kind of mother does this? I shook their hands, thanked them again, and scooped Avi up into my arms. She clung to me as I carried her back to the car. The moment I buckled her into the back seat, I knew I had to tread carefully. I needed to get her home, make her feel safe, but I also needed to know everything. Ava, sweetheart, can you tell me exactly what happened? I asked as I pulled out of the parking lot, my voice as gentle as I could manage despite the storm raging inside me. She sniffled, rubbing at her eyes. Mom took me and Greg and the baby to the park. We had a picnic. Then I had to go to the restroom. When I came back, she swallowed hard. They were gone. A sharp pain twisted in my gut. Did you try calling Mom? She nodded. Her phone was off. Unbelievable. Did anyone say anything before you left? Anything about leaving you there? Ava hesitated. Then, slowly, she pulled something out of her backpack. Her iPad. I recorded it, she whispered. For a moment, I just stared. Then, carefully, I took the device from her small hands and opened the voice recordings. The latest one was from earlier that afternoon. I pressed play, and what I heard made my blood run cold. Laura's voice, clear as day, laughing. Let's all leave while she's in the restroom. It'll be hilarious when she comes back. Greg, chuckling in the background. Yeah, let's see how long it takes before she cries. Then, Laura's mother, oh Laura, you're terrible. Followed by more laughter. They planned this. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my fingers ached. I could barely breathe past the rage boiling in my chest. They thought it was funny. I muttered, my voice deadly quiet. Ava didn't say anything. She just watched me with wide eyes. I forced myself to take a deep breath. I couldn't let her see me like this. I needed to be calm for her. Thank you for showing me this, sweetheart, I said after a long moment, keeping my voice even. You did the right thing. She nodded but didn't speak. When we got home, I made her favorite snack, peanut butter and apple slices, hoping it would help her feel better. She ate quietly at the kitchen table while I sat across from her, watching her closely. I wanted to tell her everything was going to be okay, that her mother would never do this again, that she was safe. But I wasn't going to lie to her, because Laura wasn't just going to get away with this. Not this time. As Ava finished her snack, I stood up, pulling out my phone. I had work to do, evidence to prepare, calls to make. Laura had made a mistake, a grave, unforgivable mistake, and I was about to make sure she would regret it for the rest of her life. I sat at the kitchen table long after Ava had fallen asleep, staring at my phone. My mind was racing, every possible scenario running through my head. Laura had abandoned our daughter. On purpose. As a joke. A joke. I clenched my fists, struggling to contain the fury rising inside me. The recording played in my head on a loop. Laura's laughter, Greg's voice egging her on, her mother's dismissive chuckle. They didn't just forget Ava. They deliberately left her behind, entertained by the idea of a 7-year-old girl panicking in a public park. I exhaled slowly, trying to keep my rage in check. Losing control wouldn't help Ava. I needed to handle this smartly, carefully. But most of all, I needed to make sure they never got the chance to hurt her again. I grabbed my phone and dialed Laura. She picked up on the third ring. Oh, now you're calling me, she said lazily, as if I were interrupting her. You abandoned my daughter. On purpose, I said, my voice so calm it scared even me. Laura sighed dramatically. Oh, God. Are we still on this? She's fine. Isn't she? Kids are resilient, you know? She probably already forgot about it. I gripped my phone so tightly I thought it might crack. Ava cried herself to sleep tonight, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Do you even care? Silence. Then a scoff. Oh, come on. You're being dramatic. It was just a harmless joke. She was never in danger. A harmless joke? My mind flashed to Ava sitting on that bench, hugging her knees, alone and scared. She hadn't known if anyone would come for her. She hadn't known if she would ever be safe again. "You think this is a joke?" I asked, voice tight. "You have no idea what you've done, but you will." I didn't wait for her response. I hung up. I sat there for a long moment, breathing heavily, trying to calm the storm inside me. I could still hear Laura's laugh ringing in my ears, could still picture Greg sitting beside her, amused at the thought of a terrified little girl. They thought they could brush this off. They thought there wouldn't be consequences. They were wrong. The next morning, Ava was quiet at breakfast. She pushed her cereal around with her spoon, eyes downcast. She hadn't brought up what happened again, but I could tell it was still sitting heavy in her chest. "Sweetheart," I said gently, sitting across from her, "you know what happened wasn't okay, right?" She nodded slowly but didn't look up. "I guess I wasn't important enough for them to remember," she said in a small voice. The words hit me like a sledgehammer. "Ava, listen to me." I reached for her hand, squeezing it lightly. "You are the most important person in my life. You will always be important. What they did says nothing about you and everything about them. You did nothing wrong. This is not your fault." She finally met my gaze, her eyes searching mine. "Are you mad at me?" she whispered. "Never." I shook my head. "I'm mad at them, and I promise you, I won't let this happen again." She studied me for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Okay, Daddy." That was all I needed. I dropped her off at school and then drove straight to my lawyer's office. Full custody? Marcus, my lawyer, leaned back in his chair, eyebrows raised. "That's a big move. Do you have enough to justify it?" I placed Ava's iPad on his desk and hit play. We sat in silence as the recording filled the room. Laura's laughter, Greg's taunts, her mother's voice, amused, condoning it. When it ended, Marcus let out a slow breath. "Jesus Christ." He ran a hand through his hair. "She actually planned this?" "She did." My jaw was clenched so tightly it hurt. "And I want to make sure she never gets the chance to hurt Ava again." Marcus nodded, grabbing a legal pad. "Okay, we can file for emergency custody first, given the emotional distress this caused Ava. It'll be a fight, but with this evidence, we have a strong case." "Do it," I said without hesitation. Marcus leaned forward. "You know she's going to retaliate. This is going to get ugly." "I don't care." I met his gaze. "Ava comes first. Always." Marcus nodded, already scribbling notes. Laura had made a mistake. A mistake that was going to cost her everything. That evening, as I sat on the couch with Ava watching cartoons, my phone buzzed. "Laura." I ignored it. A minute later, Greg called. Then Laura again. I let them all go to voicemail. I already knew what they wanted, to brush it off, to pretend it wasn't a big deal, maybe even to scare me into backing down. They were too late. I glanced down at Ava, who was curled up against me, her tiny body relaxed for the first time since the incident. I ran a hand through her soft curls, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. No matter what happened next, I would fight for her. Laura thought this would be another one of her games. But this time, she was playing against someone who wasn't willing to lose. Sunday arrived faster than I expected. I had spent the last 2 days preparing, working closely with Marcus to file the custody petition, gathering every piece of evidence that would expose Laura's cruelty. I had also reached out to Ava's school counselor, who had agreed to document her emotional distress after the incident. Every step was calculated, every move carefully planned. Laura had no idea what was coming. At precisely 3 p.m., the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, steeling myself before I opened the door. Laura stood there, arms crossed, eyes filled with irritation rather than guilt. Greg was beside her, smug as ever, his hands in his pockets as if he were here for a casual chat. Behind them, Laura's parents stood stiffly, their expressions unreadable. I stepped aside, gesturing for them to enter. They walked into the living room, their eyes scanning the space like they were above it, as if they weren't the ones in the wrong. I sat down in the armchair across from them, my face unreadable. Laura perched on the couch, crossing her legs, her expression exasperated. "All right," she said, sighing. "Let's get this over with." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. You think this is just a casual discussion, Laura? I asked, my voice calm but cold. She rolled her eyes. Oh my God, are you still on this? We've apologized. No, I corrected. You haven't. Greg smirked, shaking his head. Man, you're really dragging this out. The kid is fine. She's at school, right? Happy, healthy, alive? My jaw tightened. You left a 7-year-old alone in a park. Deliberately. You laughed about it, I said, my voice sharper now. Laura's mother scoffed. It was just a misunderstanding. Children need to toughen up. Ava is far too sensitive. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. You still don't get it, do you? I reached for the iPad sitting on the coffee table and pressed play. The room filled with their own laughter. Their voices echoed through the space. Every cruel word, every taunt recorded for them to hear. Laura's face drained of color. Greg shifted uncomfortably. Her parents sat frozen, unable to look at me. I let it play in full. Let them listen to every second of their own heartlessness. When the audio finally ended, the silence in the room was deafening. Laura was the first to react. You recorded us? She hissed. No, I corrected. Ava did. You left her alone, and she knew something was wrong. A 7-year-old girl had more sense than the 4 adults who abandoned her. Laura clenched her fists. You had no right. I had every right, I interrupted, my voice quiet but firm. You don't get to treat my daughter like this and walk away unscathed. Greg finally spoke, leaning forward. Look, man, you're blowing this way out of proportion. Shut up. I cut him off sharply, my eyes locking onto his. You're a pathetic excuse for a man. You stood there and encouraged this. You laughed. You thought it was funny. Well, let's see if you're still laughing after today. Laura's parents stiffened at my tone, their eyes darting nervously between us. What do you want? Laura's father finally asked. I sat back, folding my arms. Simple. Effective immediately. I'm filing for full custody. Ava is never stepping foot in your house again. None of you will ever see her unless the court allows it, and trust me, after hearing this recording, they won't. Laura's eyes widened. You can't do that. Watch me, I said flatly. Her mother gasped. You're trying to take a daughter away from her mother? Over a prank? I turned to her, my expression unreadable. A prank is hiding behind a door and saying boo. A prank is putting salt in someone's tea instead of sugar. What you did was cruelty. You deliberately abandoned a child for entertainment. That's not a prank. That's neglect. Laura's breathing had picked up. You can't take her from me, she said, her voice shaking. I'm her mother. You're supposed to be, I replied. But you've made it clear that your new family matters more to you than your own daughter. Greg scoffed. What do you think is going to happen? That will just roll over and let you win? You're being dramatic. No court is going to take full custody from a mother over one little incident. I smirked. You'd be surprised how much weight evidence holds in family court. Laura's father stood up, furious. You can't ruin our daughter's life over this. Be reasonable. Reasonable? I repeated, standing up as well. You're asking me to be reasonable when your daughter left my child abandoned and then laughed about it? Laura's mother grabbed her purse. We're leaving, she said, tugging her husband toward the door. Greg and Laura stood too, but before they could reach the exit, I spoke again. Oh, one more thing, I said, making them pause. You should probably warn Greg's clients. Once this gets out, I doubt they'll want to work with a man who thinks child neglect is funny. Greg's face darkened. You wouldn't. I would. And I already did. Laura let out a strangled sound, somewhere between frustration and panic. You're going to regret this, she seethed. No, I said coolly. You are. I opened the door wide, gesturing for them to leave. Laura stormed out, Greg following close behind. Her parents trailed after them, silent for once. I watched them go, my heart pounding but my resolve steady. This was only the beginning. They had made their choice. Now, they were going to face the consequences. The door clicked shut behind them, but the tension in the room lingered like a thick fog. I let out a slow breath, my hands still clenched into fists. My entire body felt coiled, ready to strike, but the fight was over, for now. I walked to the living room window, pulling back the curtain just enough to watch them pile into their car. Laura was talking rapidly, her hands flying in frustration, while Greg looked like he was barely holding back his own anger. Her parents were stiff, avoiding eye contact with each other, as if they had suddenly realized they had backed the wrong side. Good. Let the panic set in. I let the curtain fall back into place and turned around, my eyes landing on Ava's backpack resting on the couch. That was the only thing that mattered right now. My daughter. Her safety. Her well-being. Everything else was just noise. I sat down, rubbing my temples as the events of the last few days weighed on me. Laura's reaction had been exactly what I expected, defensive, dismissive, and completely devoid of remorse. She hadn't apologized. Not once. She hadn't even asked if Ava was okay, because in her mind, Ava didn't matter. Not as much as Greg. Not as much as their new baby. That thought alone sent another wave of anger rolling through me. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. I frowned. They couldn't be back already. I approached cautiously and peeked through the peephole. Marcus. I pulled the door open. You're fast. He walked in without waiting for an invitation, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced with sharp focus. He dropped his briefcase onto the kitchen table and pulled out a thick stack of papers. I filed everything, he said, flipping through the pages. Emergency custody request, the neglect complaint, and the petition for sole custody. The judge has already scheduled a hearing for next week. I exhaled in relief. That fast? When you have a recording of the mother laughing about abandoning her child, the system moves a little quicker, he said dryly. I sat down across from him, my fingers tapping against the table. So what happens now? Now, Marcus said, leaning back, Laura is going to go into damage control. She's going to try to spin this as a misunderstanding, claim you're being vindictive. But with this evidence, she's fighting a losing battle. If she had even a shred of self-awareness, she'd back down now. I scoffed. She won't. I know, he admitted, which is why you need to be prepared. The second she realizes she's actually in danger of losing custody, she's going to lash out. I nodded. I had no doubt that Laura would fight this. She wasn't the type to accept consequences. She never had been. Marcus pulled out another document and slid it across the table. Also, I think you should post that recording online. I raised an eyebrow. You're my lawyer. Aren't you supposed to tell me not to do that? Normally, yes, he admitted. But public pressure works wonders. If the court of public opinion turns on her, she won't have as much ground to stand on. I hesitated, my fingers brushing over the paper. Ava's voice played in my mind. I guess I wasn't important enough for them to remember. No, they needed to be exposed. I grabbed my phone, opened my social media, and started typing. My ex-wife and her husband deliberately abandoned my 7-year-old daughter at a public park as a joke. They laughed about it. They thought it was funny. Listen for yourself. I attached the recording and hit post. Marcus smirked. And now we watched the fireworks. It didn't take long. Within hours, the post had gone viral. Hundreds of comments poured in, filled with outrage and disbelief. Parents from all walks of life tore into Laura and Greg, their cruelty laid bare for the world to hear. By the next morning, news outlets had started picking up the story. Laura tried to fight back. She posted a statement, claiming it had been taken out of context, that it was all a misunderstanding, that I was manipulating the situation to paint her as a bad mother. But the public wasn't buying it. Screenshots of her social media posts bragging about her perfect new family surfaced. Comments she had made about how single dads were always bitter were dredged up. People started digging into Greg's past, finding stories from old coworkers and exes about his pattern of cruelty. It was like watching a castle crumble, brick by brick. And then, the final blow came. One of Greg's major business partners released a statement. We do not condone the behavior exhibited in the recordings circulating online. Effective immediately, we are terminating our partnership with Greg, last name. We believe in upholding values of responsibility, integrity, and kindness, qualities that he has clearly demonstrated he lacks. His entire business started to unravel overnight. I sat back, watching it unfold with quiet satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge. This was about justice. Laura had treated Ava like she was disposable. Now the world saw her for exactly what she was. And I wasn't done yet. The court hearing was coming. And when that day arrived, I would make sure there was nothing left of her so-called perfect family for her to hide behind. She had chosen her side. Now, she was going to live with the consequences. By the time the court hearing was only a few days away, Laura's life had already started crumbling around her. The internet was relentless. The recording had spread to every corner of social media, with thousands of people condemning her and Greg for what they had done to Ava. Greg's business was falling apart. Clients had pulled out. Sponsors had severed ties. And Laura? She was scrambling, desperately trying to claw her way back from the mess she had created. But there was no coming back from this. Not this time. I spent the morning going over everything with Marcus, making sure we were prepared for court. The evidence was airtight. The recording alone was damning, but we also had statements from Ava's school counselor, a psychologist who had assessed her emotional distress, and even a written testimony from the elderly couple who had found her at the park. Laura had no idea what was coming. As I was finishing up some paperwork, my phone buzzed. Laura. I let it ring. A few seconds later, a text popped up. Laura, we need to talk. Now. I stared at the message for a long moment before typing a response. Me? There's nothing left to say. Her reply was instant. Laura, I know you're angry, but we can fix this. We don't have to go to court. Let's be adults about this. I scoffed. Adults? She hadn't acted like an adult when she abandoned our daughter. She hadn't acted like an adult when she laughed about it. Now, when she was finally facing the consequences, she wanted to be adults about this. I didn't respond. A minute later, my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Laura. It was Greg. I hesitated before answering. What do you want? I said flatly. There was a pause. Then, to my surprise, he sighed. Look, man, this is getting out of hand. I almost laughed. You're just realizing that now? I get it. Okay? You're pissed. You want payback. But do you really want to destroy Laura's life over this? She did that to herself. Greg was silent for a moment. Then he let out a frustrated breath. All right, fine. You hate her. I don't blame you. But let's talk about Ava. Don't you think she needs both parents? She needs parents who love her, I said, my voice cold. Not ones who think she's a joke. It was just a mistake. It was a choice, I interrupted. She made her decision. Now she has to live with it. Come on, man, Greg said, his voice growing desperate. There's got to be something you want. A deal, a settlement. Name your price. You think this is about money? I nearly laughed. You think I'd sell my daughter's safety for a check? Greg was quiet. We're done here, I said and hung up. I stared at the phone for a moment, shaking my head. They still didn't get it. This wasn't about revenge. This was about protecting my daughter. And nothing, not money, not apologies, not empty promises, was going to stop me from doing that. That evening, I sat with Ava on the couch, watching one of her favorite cartoons. She was curled up beside me, her small hand resting on my arm. Daddy? She asked, her voice soft. Yeah, sweetheart? She hesitated. Do I have to go back to Mom's house? I swallowed hard. No, baby, you don't. She let out a small breath of relief, then turned her attention back to the screen. At that moment, I made a silent promise to myself. No matter what happened in court, no matter what Laura tried to pull, I would never let Ava feel unsafe again. Ever. Laura had chosen her new family. Now, I was choosing mine. The courtroom was colder than I expected. The air conditioning hummed softly above us, but the tension in the room made the chill even sharper. I sat at the long table, my fingers interlocked, my body still as a statue, yet my pulse drummed in my ears. Beside me, Marcus adjusted his tie, flipping through a thick binder of documents. Across the aisle sat Laura, her face pale but her posture defiant. Greg wasn't here. That told me all I needed to know. He had abandoned ship the moment it started sinking. Good. She had tried calling me 3 more times the night before. I hadn't answered. She had sent a dozen messages, shifting between anger, desperation, and fake regret. I hadn't responded, because today wasn't about her. It was about Ava. The judge walked in, a tall man with graying hair and a no-nonsense expression. He took his seat, adjusting his glasses as he surveyed the courtroom. The bailiff called the case, and the judge's eyes landed on Laura first. "Miss Carter, I see you are contesting Mr. Reynolds' petition for sole custody. However, based on the evidence provided, I find it necessary to hear an explanation before we proceed." Laura stood, smoothing her blouse, her hands visibly shaking. "Your Honor, I admit there was an unfortunate incident, but it has been completely blown out of proportion. My ex-husband has taken a single mistake and turned it into a weapon to take my child from me." Marcus let out a small breath beside me, the kind that said, "Here we go." The judge nodded. "And what is your version of events?" Laura shifted slightly, forcing a smile. "It was meant to be a harmless prank. We thought it would be funny." "You thought it would be funny?" The judge's tone hardened. "To abandon a 7-year-old child in a public park?" Laura faltered. "Well, when you say it like that." "How should I say it?" the judge asked, raising an eyebrow. Laura opened her mouth, then closed it. Silence. I could almost hear her scrambling in her mind, searching for a way to spin this, but there was nothing she could say that would make her actions sound reasonable. Marcus stood. "Your Honor, with your permission, I'd like to present Exhibit A." The judge nodded, and Marcus walked to the evidence table, setting down Ava's iPad. He pressed play, and then the courtroom was filled with Laura's laughter, Greg's voice chuckling beside her, her mother's voice dismissing it as harmless fun. The judge listened intently, his face unmoving as the full recording played. When it ended, the silence in the courtroom was deafening. Laura's face had gone completely pale. She was breathing heavily, as if realizing for the first time how damning her own words were. The judge leaned forward. "So, Ms. Carter, do you still believe this was a harmless prank?" Laura swallowed. I didn't mean." "Yes or no, Ms. Carter?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "No." The judge turned his gaze toward me. "Mr. Reynolds, I assume you have further evidence to present?" I nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. We have statements from Ava's school counselor, as well as a psychologist who evaluated her distress following the incident. Additionally, I have witness testimonies from the couple who found her abandoned at the park." Marcus handed over the documents. The judge flipped through them, nodding slowly. "This is damning evidence, Miss Carter," he said, looking back at her. "I'm struggling to understand how you believe this was appropriate behavior for a mother." Laura's hands clenched at her sides. "I love my daughter." "You have a strange way of showing it," the judge replied, unimpressed. Laura's voice cracked. "I didn't mean to hurt her." "But you did," I said, speaking for the first time. My voice was calm, but the weight of my words filled the room. "You did hurt her, and you laughed about it." Laura's lips parted as if she had a response, but nothing came. The judge exhaled slowly, setting the documents aside. "The court takes child neglect very seriously, Ms. Carter. Your actions displayed a severe lack of judgment and an alarming disregard for your child's emotional well-being. Given the evidence, I see no reason why Ava should remain in your custody." Laura's breath hitched. "Wait. Effective immediately, I am granting full custody to Mr. Reynolds. Ms. Carter, you will have no visitation rights until further notice. You may reapply for supervised visitation after a psychological evaluation and parenting courses have been completed." Laura staggered back, her eyes wide. No, you can't do this." "This is not a punishment, Miss Carter," the judge said firmly. "This is a consequence of your actions." Tears welled in Laura's eyes, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no regret. She had made her choice. Now, she had to live with it. Greg wasn't here to support her. Her parents sat frozen, silent and ashamed. And Ava? Ava was safe. That was all that mattered. The gavel struck, sealing the ruling. It was over. Laura turned to me, her expression pleading. "Please, you can't just take her away from me." I met her gaze, my voice steady. "I didn't take her away. You threw her away. And now, you have to live with that." She let out a quiet sob, but I turned away. This wasn't about her pain. This was about Ava's future. And for the first time in a long time, I knew she would be okay. The moment the gavel struck, sealing the ruling, I felt something inside me settle. It wasn't triumph, and it wasn't relief. Not yet. It was something quieter, heavier, like a weight had been lifted, but I wasn't ready to breathe just yet. Laura was still sitting there, stunned into silence. Her lips parted as if she wanted to argue, to beg, to scream. Her world had just collapsed, and I could see in her eyes that she was struggling to accept it. But there was nothing left to fight. The evidence had spoken. The judge had decided. Ava was mine now, fully, completely. Laura finally blinked, looking at me, her face a mix of anger, disbelief, and something that almost looked like fear. "You really did it," she whispered. "You took my daughter away." I exhaled slowly, standing up. "No, Laura. You threw her away." Her mouth snapped shut, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. For the first time, I saw something real in her expression. Not the arrogance, not the casual cruelty she displayed in the past. Just the hollow look of someone who had finally realized the price of her own choices. The bailiff called for adjournment, and people started shuffling out of the courtroom. Marcus clapped me on the back, murmuring something about next steps and paperwork, but I barely heard him. My focus was already shifting. I needed to get to Ava. When I arrived at her school, I spotted her immediately. She was sitting on the swing set, her feet kicking lightly against the dirt, her eyes staring up at the sky. I took a deep breath and walked toward her. She noticed me before I reached her, her face lighting up. "Daddy!" She ran straight into my arms, and I scooped her up, holding her close. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe again. "Hey, sweetheart," I murmured into her hair. "Guess what?" She pulled back, tilting her head in curiosity. "What?" I smiled. "You never have to go back to Mom's house again." Her eyes widened. "Ever? Ever?" For a moment, she just stared at me, processing. Then her small arms wrapped around my neck, squeezing tight. "Thank you, Daddy." I swallowed hard, closing my eyes against the sting of emotions. "You never have to thank me for keeping you safe, baby." I held her for a long time, rocking slightly, letting the weight of everything settle. This was it. We were free. The following days were quiet, almost eerily so. Laura didn't call. Greg didn't reach out. There were no angry messages, no desperate pleas. Just silence. I knew it wouldn't last forever, but for now, I took the peace as it came. Ava and I settled into our new normal. Mornings were filled with pancakes and giggles, afternoons with homework and park visits, and nights with bedtime stories and whispered goodnights. She slept peacefully now, no longer curling into herself like she was bracing for something bad to happen. She was healing, and so was I. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, Ava glanced up at me. "Daddy?" "Yeah, sweetheart?" She hesitated. "Do you think Mom misses me?" The question caught me off guard. I glanced down at her, seeing the honest curiosity in her big eyes. She wasn't sad, wasn't hurt, just wondering. I thought about it for a moment before answering. "I think she misses the idea of you, Ava, but not in the way she should." She seemed to think about that for a while, then nodded slowly. "That's okay. I don't really miss her either." It wasn't said with malice, just quiet acceptance. And for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I realized something. Ava was stronger than I'd ever given her credit for. And she was going to be okay. We both were. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, life began to feel normal again. Not the kind of normal where I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Not the kind of normal where I had to constantly worry about what Laura would do next. This was a new normal. A peaceful one. Ava thrived in it. Her laughter came easier, her steps lighter. She no longer flinched at the sound of my phone ringing, no longer hesitated when she mentioned things she loved for fear that someone would dismiss her. She was growing into herself in a way that hadn't been possible before. And I finally had the chance to be the father I had always wanted to be. We spent our afternoons at the park, where she raced across the playground, her hair flying behind her as she shouted for me to watch. We made pancakes on Saturday mornings, getting flour everywhere, laughing as she tried to flip them with a spatula twice her size. At night, she curled up in her bed, surrounded by stuffed animals, and asked me to read her stories. Sometimes she wanted adventure tales, other times silly ones. But the nights she crawled onto my lap and said, "Tell me a story about when I was little," were my favorite, because those were the nights I reminded her how loved she had always been, how she had always been wanted, how she would never have to wonder if she was enough. But peace never lasts forever. It happened one afternoon while I was at work. I had just finished up a meeting when my phone buzzed with a notification. Ava's school. My stomach tightened. I answered immediately. "This is Mr. Reynolds." The principal's voice was calm but firm. "Mr. Reynolds, we need you to come to the school as soon as possible." Ava's mother showed up. I went cold. She what? She came to the school unannounced and demanded to see Ava. When we informed her that she had no visitation rights, she caused a scene. Security escorted her out, but we thought you should be aware. I didn't even remember driving to the school. One moment I was at my desk, the next I was storming through the front doors, my heart pounding like a war drum. The principal met me in the office, his expression serious. "Ava wasn't aware of what happened," he assured me. "She was in class the entire time, but I'd recommend talking to her tonight, just in case Laura tries something again." I nodded, my jaw tight. I had known this wasn't over. I had known Laura wouldn't just disappear into the shadows quietly. But knowing it and experiencing it were two different things. She had tried to ambush my daughter at school. That was unacceptable. I thanked the principal, signed out Ava early, and drove her home, forcing myself to stay calm, to not let her see the storm raging inside me. She hummed along to the music on the radio, blissfully unaware of what had happened. But I knew I had to tell her, and I had to make sure she felt safe. That night, after dinner, I tucked her into bed and sat beside her. "Sweetheart," I said gently, brushing a stray curl from her face. "I need to talk to you about something." She blinked up at me, her small hands holding her stuffed bear. "Okay, Daddy." I exhaled slowly. "Mom came to your school today." Her little face scrunched up. She did, I confirmed. "But the school told her she wasn't allowed to see you, and she had to leave." Ava was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Why did she come?" she finally asked. I chose my words carefully. "I think she doesn't like that she lost custody, and now she's trying to act like nothing happened." Ava hugged her bear closer. "Is she gonna try to take me?" The fear in her voice nearly shattered me. "No," I said firmly. "She can't. The court made sure of that, and I will never, ever let anything happen to you." She searched my face, and after a long moment, she nodded. "Okay." I leaned down, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You're safe, sweetheart. Always." She gave me a small smile before turning onto her side, closing her eyes. I sat there for a while, watching her sleep, my heart still heavy with the weight of what had almost happened. Laura was testing boundaries, and I wasn't going to wait for her to cross the next one. I stood up, grabbed my phone, and stepped into the hallway. I scrolled through my contacts and pressed call. Marcus picked up on the second ring. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you." "Laura showed up at Ava's school today," I said, my voice low. There was a pause, then a sharp exhale. "All right, time to make sure that never happens again." And just like that, the fight wasn't over. But this time, I was ready. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept replaying the phone call from the school. The thought of Laura showing up unannounced, trying to worm her way back into Ava's life like nothing had happened, made my blood boil. She wasn't going to stop. I knew that now. The custody ruling had been a blow to her, but instead of accepting the consequences of her actions, she was going to fight, manipulate, and push boundaries until she found a crack to slip through. But I wasn't going to let that happen. At dawn, I was already up, sipping coffee at the kitchen table, my phone pressed to my ear as Marcus answered. "Morning," he said, his voice still groggy. "I take it you're not calling just to chat." "She showed up at the school, Marcus," I said, cutting straight to the point. He sighed. "Yeah, I figured she might. She's desperate. We need to make sure she doesn't try this again." "Already ahead of you," he said. I can file for a restraining order today. Given the court's previous ruling, it should be a straightforward process. Good. Do it. Marcus hesitated. You know she's going to push back, right? She might even try to take you back to court to fight for visitation. I gritted my teeth. Let her try. Because she would lose. We wrapped up the call, and I spent the rest of the morning making sure all of Ava's school records were updated with strict instructions that only I was allowed to pick her up. Every precaution was put in place. By the afternoon, Marcus sent me the confirmation. The restraining order was officially filed. Laura would be served within the next 24 hours. She wasn't going to like it, but she wasn't my problem anymore. When I picked Ava up from school, she was her usual bubbly self, swinging her backpack over her shoulder as she hopped into the car. Daddy, guess what? She said excitedly. What? We're learning about space, she beamed. And I told my teacher that I want to be an astronaut when I grow up. I grinned. An astronaut, huh? That's pretty cool. She nodded. Do you think I can do it? I reached over, ruffling her hair. Sweetheart, you can do anything you set your mind to. She beamed up at me, and in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. This was what mattered. Not Laura, not the drama, just Ava, her dreams, her future, everything I was doing, the custody battle, the legal fights, the sleepless nights, was for her. And now, she had the chance to grow up in a home where she was wanted, loved, and most importantly, safe. That night, as I was tucking her into bed, Ava turned to me with a small frown. Daddy? Yeah, sweetheart? She hesitated. Do you think Mom is mad at me? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. Why do you ask that? I kept my voice gentle. She shrugged, picking at the edge of her blanket. Because she doesn't call anymore. I sighed, sitting on the edge of her bed. Sweetheart, your mom. She's not mad at you. But sometimes, people make bad choices, and they have to deal with the consequences. She was quiet for a moment before she whispered, Do you think she's sad? I thought about it. Maybe. But Laura wasn't sad for the right reasons. She wasn't mourning the loss of her daughter. She was mourning the loss of control. But that wasn't Ava's burden to carry. I don't know, baby, I said honestly. But what I do know is that you don't have to worry about it. That's my job, okay? She nodded, biting her lip. I just don't want anyone to be sad. My heart squeezed. Even after everything, she still had the kindest heart. I leaned down and kissed her forehead. You just focus on being happy, sweetheart. That's all that matters. She gave me a small smile, then yawned, snuggling into her pillow. Good night, Daddy. Good night, Ava. I turned off her lamp and stepped into the hallway, my heart heavy but sure. Ava was safe. She was healing. And no matter what Laura did next, I would always be there to protect her. Because that's what real parents do. They don't abandon their children. They fight for them. And I would fight for Ava every single day for the rest of my life.